I'm David Rives, host of the TV show Creation in the 21st Century on TBN. Each week we talk about breaking discoveries in science which reveal that our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Check us out and sign up for email updates at davidrives.com. Subscribe to our free monthly magazine and like us on Facebook for weekly inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible. Evolutionary science would lead us to believe that over time, we've become a lot smarter. That's what we read in our textbooks, but a careful examination of cultures from the distant past proves that there is a whole lot more to the story than we're being told. Today on Wonders Without Number, we will examine the lost secrets of ancient civilizations, including ancient technology that causes today's scientists and engineers to wonder in amazement. Welcome to Wonders Without Number. I'm David Rives, and today we want to inform and inspire you regarding the wonders we find all around us. An infinite number of wonders that point us directly to our Creator, the God of the Bible. Now, you are no accident. I want you to know that you're created special. You were created in God's own image. Jesus Christ was and is that Creator, and that He has a plan for your life. Now, before we meet our special guest who has some very important things to share, let's take a look at this week's Heavens Declare segment. Throughout the Old Testament, we find that many times Israel was drawn away from the worship of the Creator by the idolatry of the surrounding nations who worship the hosts of heaven, the sun and the moon. While those heavenly bodies are not to be worshipped, they were created with a purpose. A careful study of calendars gives us great insight. So let's take a look right now. In ancient times, celestial bodies such as the sun, moon, and stars were central figures of the zodiac. They were considered to be gods and goddesses, and based on the zodiac, the movements of the heavens have become a means of divination. Scripture informs us that they worshiped the created more than the Creator. In the book of Kings, Josiah ordered that those who worship the sun, the moon, Mazaloth, and all the hosts of heaven be put to death. Much can be learned about the significance of lights in the heavens from the Hebrew lunisolar calendar. The beginning of months is determined by the observation of the moon. The feasts of the Lord, including Passover, are based heavily on lunar timing. Days and years are calculated by the position of the sun, as well as the stars. Our present calendar does not coincide with those used in biblical times. It is a solar calendar adopted by Pope Gregory in 1582. Many of the months are named after pagan gods, the very same gods acknowledged by astrologers in their use of the zodiac. Not only that, but our days of the week are named after astrological symbols, including the sun, moon, and Saturn. Scripture informs us that the sun, moon, and stars were created for signs, seasons, days, and years. Thousands of years have passed, but just as in the beginning, those very same heavenly bodies can still be relied upon for our calculation of time. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Over the course of history, those who were amazed by the magnificence of the celestial bodies have been drawn to the worship of that which was created more than the Creator Himself. While everything was created by the God of the Bible with purpose, only the Creator is to be worshipped. Just as King David wrote in Psalm 19, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Now, we're all familiar with the diagram in which primates begin to stand up and become men. Evolutionary scientists would lead us to believe that we are nothing more than highly developed animals. They depict our ancestors as cavemen with clubs who are suddenly amazed by the ability to start a fire. Today, archaeological evidences prove that human intelligence is not the result of evolution. And along with my friend Mike Snavely, we will be exploring ancient civilizations. Just how smart were those people? Now, growing up in an area of South Africa that teemed with complex and diverse creatures, Mike learned firsthand many remarkable things about nature. His father was a bush pilot for a mission hospital providing services for the Zulu people. He's worked for the National Park Service in Kruger National Park, South Africa, which in some circles has earned him the nickname Ranger Mike. He formed Mission Imperative in 1995 and teaches on creation-oriented issues through speaking engagements and a series of fascinating DVDs on these subjects. So at this time, join with me as we welcome my friend and very special guest, Mike Snavely. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thanks, good to be here.
Great to have you on. Tell me just a little bit about Mission Imperative.
Well, we're a not-for-profit organization, and we travel the nation and sometimes different countries around the world doing a series of seminars that try to explain the biblical version of origins versus the man-made version.
Yes.
That's our primary task.
That's great. Yeah. And today, we're going to be talking about some of these locations. Now, you've had a chance to visit some of these places that you'll be showing today.
Right.
And also some amazing technology, which seems to indicate that they were not cavemen back then, right?
Right, right.
Well, we're excited to learn. So why don't you just go ahead and jump in and tell us a little bit about this.
This is a fascinating look at what ancient man was able to do, because there are a lot of books on the market today that talk about the mysteries of ancient man. And when we look at things that have been labeled oop art, out of place artifacts, oop art. So,
I like that.
Yeah, so they're only out of place because of our view of the history of mankind. Our view has been that mankind began, you know, essentially as a blob of goo billions of years ago, and, you know, we've slowly made our way through the caveman stage, and now we have, you know, kind of evolved to where we are now. So the further back we go in time, the more primitive things should be. But when we look at ancient man, we don't see, you know, this ancient Stone Age and then back into these more ape-like. We find fascinating things that mankind has been able to do, as opposed to the evolution model.
In other words, not necessarily increasing intelligence over millions of years.
No, in fact, we're finding kind of the opposite. We're finding that ancient man was able to do astonishing things that have so baffled many scientists today that people say, well, it has to have been aliens. Right. So aliens get the credit for doing some things that, you know, we just find so amazing today.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So what we want to look at today is basically that contrast. Why are things so strange? And it's only strange because of our view of history that we're being taught in all around us, in our museums, in our public school system, and so forth. That, you know, that mankind was a brute at one time, and so forth. So we want to kind of contrast this. We want to look at a little bit at the two perspectives, let's just say, of history.
Okay.
And we have a vertical line here, which represents the beginning of time. Okay. However you want to look at it. This is when time began. Okay. So we have the evolution model, or I should say, rather, first of all, the horizontal line represents the passage of time. So you have the beginning of time, passage of time.
Okay.
The evolution model says that everything began simply in the mud or in the slime, or as Darwin said, a warm little pond, whatever. Okay, it began very simple. So we very simple, very primitive. And with the passage of time, mankind has had this upward mobility. In other words, this has been, the evolution model says that mankind has gotten better and better. What we mean by that is more and more complex with the passage of time. That's this model. The creation model says the exact opposite. The creation model says, no, we began perfect.
Perfect.
When God made everything, he said it's good.
That's right.
Which means that was awesome at the beginning. That's true word, true use of the word.
When God says something's good, that means it's really, really good.
It was really good. Everything was absolutely perfect. But with the passage of time, mankind began a decline.
Okay.
And so because of sin, because of the curse of the earth, that nature is groaning and so forth, according to Romans, we have this downward spiral. Okay. So I've drawn our arrow, not just a downward arrow. You'll see these peaks here, you know, and this represents the peaks of civilizations in the past. Mankind, at the peak of every one of the great civilizations of the past, has been able to accomplish astounding things that baffle us today. But on the decline of every one of those civilizations, they've always exhibited the same negative traits: declining moral standards, despotism, human sacrifice, and violence, and so forth. All the great civilizations.
In other words, there are patterns that repeat on the downward trend.
Yes.
That we've seen throughout the great civilizations.
Right, and that we can compare that to our own, which we'll do it toward the end.
Okay.
So what we want to do is look at the amazing words of the wisest man who ever lived. King Solomon said, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done." There's nothing new under the sun. In other words, the cycles of history are just going to repeat themselves. We keep thinking we're doing new things, but we might find new ways of doing things, but we just keep doing the same things. Is there anything whereof it may be said, "See, this is new. It hath been already of old time, which is before us. There's no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after." And this is a mysterious verse. Like, what's Solomon getting at here? Are we just sort of doomed to this cycle, it seems, that we'll just keep forgetting the past? Well, let's just have a little bit of a look, to start with, at that peak that we talked about of a civilization, at some of the amazing things that ancient man has been able to do. And we'll just take a look at a few. There's so many more that you could look at.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oop art is everywhere.
Yeah.
So let's just start in Central America. There was various tombs that had been discovered showing that ancient man has traveled. So in the same tomb, for example, are carvings of people from different parts of the world. For example, here you have Phoenician. The ancient Phoenicians have traveled, and there's evidence of that all down the east coast of the Americas, into the Gulf, down the east coast of South America. The ancient Phoenicians were all through that area. And of course, you have Africans, you have Chinese, you have Mongol, all in the same Central American tombs. So we know that the ancients were traveling. Now, we say that we're living in the day and age of travel, but really, the ancients were already traveling.
So these were representations all found in the same area, which means that they would have seen these people at one time or the other.
They would have seen them, and they might have been visiting.
They would have,
Right, yeah. So the ancients have traveled. Well, that might not seem so weird in and of itself, so let's just kind of take it to the next level.
Okay.
So you're looking here at in the yellow is Mexico, and you're seeing the Yucatan Peninsula. Well, in the Yucatan Peninsula, there are structures, and not just there, all throughout this region, but especially in this region. There are structures that we would call pyramids, and of course you can see they have their own local flavor architecturally.
Yeah.
That don't quite look like the pyramids of Egypt, but strangely...
ziggurat-like, I guess.
Right. Strangely, though, many of them have the same or very similar base dimensions as the pyramids in Egypt, which have brought up interesting questions. Was one the copy of another? Could it have had a common designer?
Right.
And if you look at some of these things, for example, again, their own architecture, but if you look in the background, you see hills, mountains.
I see. Okay.
Those aren't hills or mountains. Those are all pyramids buried by the jungle.
Still buried.
Still buried. Now, these particular ones, many of them have been dug out, but they estimate now, the closest estimate they can figure out is there might be as many as 100,000 pyramids in this area, all through this area.
Wow.
Which most of them are just still buried. You can't get to them and so forth. So there are evidences of great things that people have done, I mean, building-wise, that just... are now the ability to do these things has just kind of gone. We don't know how they did all this. And the ancients were obviously traveling, seeing maybe things from other civilizations and copying them.
And could it be possible that some of these people visited Egypt, saw their design, or vice versa?
It is possible, and that's part of the mystery. We don't know, but ancient man was able to accomplish these things, and many others as well.
Like what you're seeing? You can find so much more on the Creation Superstore. You'll find over 900 books and videos on origin science, creation, and Bible history. Whether you're looking for nature documentaries, educational books, homeschool resources, or children's videos, we've got it all, so be sure to head over and check it out. Use the promo code to receive 10% off your first order.
And so you move a little south into Maya territory, more into Maya territory. And here's a famous, interesting little building that when it was first discovered in modern times, they asked the locals, what is this? What is this building? And the folks said, well, we don't know. All we know is the stories passed down from our ancestors. Oh, well, what are those stories? Yeah. Well, apparently our forefathers used to be able to go up into this thing and communicate great distances.
Okay.
Oh, they could? How? We don't know. And that's a mystery.
Right.
Could they, though, have had a means to communicate that is now forgotten, that is now lost to us, like Solomon said?
Yes.
Did they have a simple way of communicating? Radio, maybe, but that's just been forgotten. Nobody knows. And so it still kind of remains a little bit of a mystery. But I had some friends who visited that very building, and their guide took them around the corner and showed them this big amphitheater.
Okay.
In the amphitheater, the guy said, stand right here where the priest of the sun used to stand, back when this was a thriving civilization.
Yeah.
He said, if you look to your left and to your right, you see these stones that are kind of broken down now. But he says, at the time that this was a thriving civilization, those stones were highly polished and angled exactly so that when the priest stood in this exact spot, all he had to do was speak in his normal voice, and just the angle of the stones would amplify his voice so everybody in the amphitheater could hear it. No need of a microphone, no need of electricity, no need of an amplifier, loudspeakers. Simplified ingenuity is what it's called.
So basically, they had ways to accomplish these things that arguably might have been more efficient than we have today.
Yeah, and very low maintenance.
Right.
Just maybe keep the stones polished every day. That's about all you had to do.
Wow.
So this whole thing gets maybe even weirder when you move a little further south into the area around Bolivia. There's a place called Tiahuanaco that has large stones, and the place looks like it was built for a race of giants almost, just very large stones. In fact, the slab under the gateway is estimated to weigh 100 tons.
Wow.
Now, they have apparently found the area where the stones were excavated from 60 miles away over the Andes Mountains. Now, this is 13,000 feet.
Okay.
So the big question was, how do you move a 100-ton stone 60 miles? How do you do that? So they asked some of the locals, well, how did your ancestors do this? And they said, well, we don't know. We just know the stories. Again, similar idea.
Yeah.
Those stories were that the ancestors used to be able to move great heavy things with the aid of sound. The aid of what? Sound. Okay, now, all right, maybe that's just totally folklore, or maybe we invoke witchcraft or whatever. But before we just dismiss it as one of those things, could they have had some technology that we no longer know?
Right.
Like Solomon said, it was forgotten. Now, maybe they knew what was known over in the Middle East. Let's cross the oceans and go look at Baalbek.
Okay.
This is in the country of Lebanon.
Wow.
This is the world's largest megalith. This thing is huge.
This is one stone.
One stone carved there. Okay.
Okay.
Now, this thing is huge. This thing is 14 feet by 16 feet by 66 feet. Conservative estimates put it at about 1,200 tons or more. How do you move a stone that big? So somebody might argue, well, who says they're moving it? Maybe they aren't moving it.
Right.
Well, they were. Because if you look up here, you'll see some Roman columns.
Okay.
Those columns are built on top of an old structure that the Romans, when they were conquering Palestine, found this old structure already in ruins, and it was apparently an old temple. What baffled them was the base of that structure was made with 3 of these already. So 3 of these were already moved from here over to there and put as the foundation. Now, the Roman engineers were not slouches.
Sure.
They know their story.
Oh, I've been to Rome. They're quite the engineers themselves.
Well, but all over Europe.
Yes.
When I was speaking in Portugal, they took us under an aqueduct on the freeway, and they said, this was built by the Romans. It's still used in Lisbon today.
Right.
So you think about things that the Romans built 2,000 years ago are still being used. So they knew what they were doing. The Roman engineers said it is impossible to move these stones.
Okay.
There is no way to move these stones. There must be a god here.
Yes.
So what they said is, we'd better erect our own temple on top of this to try and appease whatever this local god is to help us in our military campaign.
Wow.
So that was their mindset back then. Now the Roman stuff has fallen down, just those columns left. But the mystery is, who moved the stones and how?
And you see all of the Roman architecture, the Colosseum, and all of these things that are actually still standing today.
Right.
And they were mystified by this.
Totally, yeah. And to this day, what did the ancients know that we've forgotten? They were obviously moving it.
Right.
So let's go across the continents again over to China. And
Okay.
let's look at one of the dynasties, the Han Dynasty. There was Lady Di, who died, literally, 100 years before Jesus was born. They knew more or less where she was buried, and some years ago, they located her tomb and they exhumed her body. They opened up her casket, and there was another little casket inside, and so for this, one of those little, like those Russian dolls you keep opening up, you know.
Yeah.
So they got down to her body, and that was where the first surprise was.
Okay.
They found that her body was wrapped in silk. Now, the silk wasn't a surprise, because people have known about the silk trade in China for many years.
Sure.
But what was a surprise is the fact that the silk was printed in color in repeating patterns.
Printed in
color, and right on. Now, interestingly, our textbooks would say that Hans Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1450 or something like this.
Right.
Okay, well, the Chinese had developed a multicolor printing press long before.
Yeah.
Hans Gutenberg invented a monocolor printing press, and I've seen. I've been in Mainz, Germany, to that museum, and you can see it's an incredible machine.
Yes.
But this was multicolored. That was the first shock. So again, cycles of history repeated. This machine was forgotten and kind of rediscovered in Hans Gutenberg's time.
Exactly.
Then came the big shock, though. When they finally unwrapped her body, they came down to her body. And they actually found that her skin was still supple, her hair was still firmly rooted in her scalp, and they were astounded at what they saw with her body. They do not know how a body is preserved that many years, 2,100 years, and her body was still preserved to the point where they could actually, even still with a machine, still see her last meal in her stomach.
Really?
And you can actually see her in the museum today in Shanghai. And she got a sealed glass coffin. And that's I mean, there's not an undertaker alive that knows how to preserve a body that long.
Sure.
Likewise, nobody understands this map. This is the Piri Rice map. Let's go back over to the Mediterranean.
Okay.
Drawn in 1513 by Admiral Piri Rice, who was copying this onto a deer skin, which is in a museum in Istanbul now.
Yeah.
This was a copy from even older maps.
Okay.
And it fits wider this way, but perhaps should be turned 90 degrees, and you can actually see. But it's amazing what it shows. It shows number one, that the oceans were lower at one point in the past. Now, we know that from issues related to the flood, which is a different program.
Sure.
But the oceans were slightly lower at one point. Secondly, it shows the accurate coastline of Antarctica, which we only discovered in the 1950s.
Okay.
Who was it that drew this map? How did they get so accurate? Right. Scientists have studied this. They thought it was the ancient Greeks. It turned out that the design of the map even predates ancient Greeks. So the mystery remains, who drew the original maps that Piri Rice was copying in 1513, and how did they get so accurate?
Right.
Who was sailing around the world to know the exact coastline of Antarctica?
Yes, which is typically covered by ice. You're talking about the
actual land coastline, not just the ice flows.
Okay.
So that big mystery.
Right.
So when you cross over the Mediterranean and you go look at another ancient culture, which is totally fascinating. And if you go to Egypt, of course, you're there, most people will go to see the Sphinx and the pyramids and so forth, which of course are totally fascinating from an ancient cultural perspective.
Sure.
But if you go off the beaten track, you can see some other amazing things. Like in the little town of Abydos, there is a strange little temple that's been there longer than anybody can remember, with some very interesting little carvings on it.
Okay.
And for example, what does this thing look like?
Well,
It looks like a helicopter,
like a helicopter.
You know, and this thing like a submarine and a plane and a little, I don't know, this looks like something from the Jetsons.
Yeah,
yeah. You know. Now, there are cults that have built up around this. I mean, there's strange things that people believe. I don't know what it means.
Right.
It could have been the musings of a genius like Leonardo da Vinci, who drew some interesting machines that predated,
Sure.
the real machines that, that came, later on.
Yeah.
Who knows? These might have been the musings of a genius.
Okay.
But it does give us an indication of, wow, what were they thinking of back then? We don't know what these things are, but we do know what this thing was. It was discovered in 1898
Okay.
in an Egyptian tomb, 1898.
Wow.
They didn't know what it was because it didn't fit the typical pottery and the things that you normally think of you're finding in a tomb.
Yeah.
So they called it the wooden bird and put it back in back room of a museum. In the early 1940s, now World War II is going on.
Okay.
They got this thing out, they found it again. They said, when was this discovered? 1898, before the Wright brothers flew.
Wow.
People back then, and they still do today, they do drawings of this thing.
Yeah.
They've actually made models of it, put power to it, and it flies.
And it flies.
Now, nobody's saying that Egypt Air is in existence or anything like that back in those ancient times, but the whole point is they certainly knew about flight.
This is incredible. Now, we only have about 2 minutes left, but I want to sort of get to how this affects our country or our culture today.
Right.
Can we summarize with that?
We can. We
Okay.
can. That what's going on is Romans 1:21. We've got this is astounding stuff because we can actually see a step down. We can see that the civilization being described here starts off at the top, knowing God, when they knew God. But the verse doesn't end there. It says, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful.
Yes.
That's the next step down. The next step down is refusing to worship and be thankful. It seems like a simple step, but it is a step down.
Sure.
But then the verses continue. But they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Now we've replaced God. Every time you replace
Okay.
God, it is always going to be something foolish. Just look at evolution, for example.
Sure.
We've replaced the marvelous design of creation with an idea that says it just came about by random chance.
Yeah.
This is a foolish replacement of what God said he did.
Wow.
But then it goes on and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made of corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. And then that's the next step down, is idolatry.
Oh, yes.
You can just see this civilization taking the steps down.
Okay.
Therefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves.
Yeah.
Now we've taken another step down into immorality.
Right.
Continues. Who exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Then it says, for this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did exchange the natural use for that which is against nature.
Yes.
Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which is fitting.
Right.
Now we've gone beyond just plain immorality to now using what God originally made, and it's now depraved.
Yes.
But then as that chapter ends, we see a list that gets almost tiring to read. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not seemly, who knowing the judgment of God, that they who commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So it behooves us, as we look at the end of it, to say, what do you think that represents?
Right.
To me, it represents total societal chaos.
When
And when we look at our
the
culture,
downward steps,
where are we on this downward step?
and we won't give an answer to that, but you look at this and tell us where you think we are, because we've come a long ways, and it's not an upwards evolution of intelligence.
That's right.
It's a downward spiral.
That's exactly what it is.
Thank you again for being here today.
You're very welcome.
And we were only able to touch on just a few of the issues today. I'm David Rives, and until our next time on Wonders Without Number, keep looking up. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Hello, I'm David Rives, host of the television show Creation in the 21st Century on TBN, and author of the book Wonders Without Number. When we look at science from a biblical perspective, remarkable things are revealed. Belief in the historical account of creation as found in the book of Genesis reveals much about the meaning of life and gives reason for our existence. Where did all the matter in the universe come from? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Visit our website and sign up for our email updates to receive links to free videos dealing with science, astronomy, creation, and the Bible. Give us a call to find out more about David Rives Ministries or to order additional copies of this DVD and our other great resources. Like us on Facebook and drop us a line on how this program has impacted your life. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.